Dedication. For those who want to escape for a short period of time. I would like to thank you, the reader, for giving this book a chance. Cold Case. The rookies in the detective department got stuck doing the busy work. They created reports, went on ride-alongs, logged evidence, and looked over cold cases. Most of the cases went back into storage because the leads went dry or were dead ends. Cases could sit for years until someone looked them over again, finding things someone else had missed, and were able to make a break in the case. Caleb Johnson was a rookie detective who spent 5 years as a beat cop. He took the detective exam after discovering there were a few cases he worked on that went unsolved. His first day as a detective, he was assigned to look over the cold case files. He was drawn into a 15-year-old case. The victim disappeared without a trace. Interviews were conducted of her loved ones and neighbors, but nothing ever came of it. He signed the case out of the archives and brought it home with him. He scoured over it for hours before finding something wrong. There were multiple mentions of a carpenter. She'd been remodeling the house. From the look of the case files, there was no interview conducted with the carpenter. Detective Johnson was on a mission. The following morning, he grabbed the case file and went back to the office. He spoke to the original detectives on the case. They told him they could never find the carpenter the neighbors spoke of. The carpenter showed up in a plain white van. There was no company name on it. He sat down at his desk and began researching. He found all the old neighbors. Some were still in their homes, while others had moved out of state. He called those who were out of state and left messages with his cell phone number. By lunch, he was on the road, heading to her neighborhood. He needed to see if the neighbors remembered anything new. Sometimes after the dust settles and some time passes, things come back to people. He pulled up to her neighbor's house and knocked on the door. A woman with a child on her hip answered the door. "Hello, can I help you?" she asked.
"Good afternoon, ma'am," he said. "My name is Detective Johnson. I have reopened the investigation into Maggie Hart's case. Were you living here at the time?"
"Yes," she said. "Maggie was a great person, and I miss her more and more every day. She would come over for a glass of wine once a week after the kids went to bed, and we would discuss everything going on in our lives. She was a beautiful girl with a great spirit."
"What can you tell me about the carpenter?" he asked.
"It was so long ago," she said. "I remember he came every day in a plain white van. There was no writing or anything, but he showed up every day at exactly 8 and left around 6, except for the day she disappeared. I don't remember seeing him that day. It was weird because he had been coming every day for a month. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, because she had told me the day before the remodel was almost done. But something needed to be ordered to finish it, so I thought he just wasn't there because what he needed had not come in."
"Can you tell me anything about his appearance?"
"I remember he had dark hair, but I never saw his face. He always had a hat on and would walk into the house carrying things on his left side. He was about as tall as my husband, so I say he was at least 6 foot tall and slender. He didn't talk to us at all and barely said anything to Maggie. I thought it was weird, but some people, when they are doing a job, don't like to socialize."
"Can you remember any distinguishing marks, a tattoo perhaps?"
"No. Wait, yes. I couldn't tell what it was, but he wiped his face with his shirt one day, and I saw a black tattoo on his lower back. It may have covered his back. I don't think men are into tramp stamps."
"Great. Thank you for your time. Here's my card. If there is anything you can remember, please call me."
"I will," she said. He walked down the steps to the porch and over to the house directly across the street from Maggie's former home. The door opened before he could knock on it. The elderly woman on the other side stood about 5 feet tall. Her wavy white hair was perfectly styled. She had on a purple floral print house dress. "I saw you coming," she said. "Come on in and have a seat."
"Thank you, ma'am,"
he said, and followed her into the living room. She sat in a chair next to the window, which looked out over the street. She motioned for him to take the one across from her.
"Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions. It is about the woman who used to live across the street, Maggie Hart. Do you remember her?"
Just because I'm old doesn't mean my mind is going. Of course I remember her. Such a sweet girl. She used to take me to the grocery store, and sometimes we would even share a meal."
"Ma'am, I am asking in particular about the events leading up to her disappearance. I have heard about the carpenter. Do you remember anything about him?"
"As a matter of fact, I do," she said, getting up from her chair. She walked into the kitchen and came back with a business card in her hand. "That is the young man who was working for her. She gave me his business card when I asked her what he was doing at her house. I was looking to get some work done in here."
"Ma'am, did you mention it to the other officers that interviewed you?"
"I did, and even offered his card, but they only looked at it."
"Interesting," he said. "Did you ever contact him?"
"Not after Maggie disappeared. I was scared to."
"I don't blame you," he said. "Do you mind if I take this card?"
"It is all yours," she said. "And please find her, or what was done to her, for her family's peace of mind and all of ours."
"I plan on it," he said. "Thank you for your help today."
"You're very welcome. Maggie would have liked you. She had a thing for handsome young police officers."
"Really?" he said.
"Oh, yes. Ask Officer Davidson. They were dating at the time she disappeared."
"I did not know that," he said. "I'll have to ask him about her. Thank you again."
He left the house, knowing what his next move was going to be. Driving back to the station, he thought about the questions he was going to ask Detective Davidson. He was going to have to tread lightly, but he needed answers. He walked into the office with a scowl on his face. Approaching Davidson's office, he took a deep breath. He needed to calm down before his temper flared. He walked in and shut the door. Davidson looked up from his computer. "Can I help you, Detective?"
"As a matter of fact, you may be the key to solving my case,"
Detective Johnson said. "Really? I am intrigued. What case are you working on?"
"The disappearance of Maggie Hart," he said.
Watching the color drain from Detective Davidson's face, Davidson cleared his throat and shuffled in his chair.
"I remember that case," he said. "You should, since she was your girlfriend at the time," Detective Johnson said.
"No one knew that," he said. "How did you find out?"
"Let's just say that a sweet little birdie told me."
"That damn old lady?" he said.
"I didn't say it was her," he said.
"She was the only one who could have known, or was looking out her window."
"Do you want to confess something?"
"Well, it had nothing to do with her disappearance," he said. "We are done here. Get out of my office."
"I will, but I will find out what happened to her. If you had something to do with it, you will go to jail."
"I didn't have anything to do with her death," he said through gritted teeth.
"No one has ever said she was dead," he said. "Where's her body?"
"I meant disappearance. We can only assume she is dead. I mean, it is only logical. She has been gone for so long."
"I am not assuming she is dead. As far as anyone knows, she could have left the state or even the country after a bad breakup."
"I am done with this conversation," he said, standing up. There was a knock on the door. A 16-year-old girl came into the office. "Hi, Daddy," she said. "Are you okay? You look mad."
I'm fine, Pumpkin," he said.
"Hi," she said. "You're new. I'm Shelley."
"Nice to meet you, Shelley. I'm Caleb."
"Nice to meet you, too. Daddy, you ready to go to my lacrosse game?"
"Yeah, let's go," he said.
They all left the office. Meeting Davidson's daughter got him thinking. Maybe he did not have anything to do with Maggie's disappearance. Perhaps it was his wife. Maybe she found out about him and Maggie and decided to eliminate the competition. Since Davidson confessed Maggie was dead, he had something to do with it. Did he commit the crime or help his wife in covering it up? He needed to find out more about Davidson. He asked what the story was on Davidson and how he came up in the ranks. Typical rookie questions. There was bound to be someone in the office who would spill the beans. There were quite a few people who told him about Davidson. He was not well liked. Detective Johnson learned that Davidson was divorced and newly remarried. Johnson needed to visit the ex-wife. He looked her up in the database, finding her current address. He arrived at her home a half hour later. He rang the doorbell and waited. She came to the door 3 minutes later. "Can I help you?" she asked.
"Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Detective Caleb Johnson. I would like to ask you a few questions regarding the disappearance of Maggie Hart."
"Who is that?"
"She disappeared 15 years ago from the Haverton area."
"Oh, wait, I think I remember hearing about that on the news. I had just had my daughter and had a lot of late-night feedings. Please come in," she said. He followed her to the back of the house. She sat down at the kitchen table and he followed. "Do you want something to drink, Detective?"
"No, thank you. You were living in the area at the time of the disappearance, correct?"
"Yes, I was married to an officer at the time who is now a detective," she said, with a hint of disdain in her voice. "I don't know why you would want to question me about her disappearance, though. I didn't know her."
"No? I thought you might have known her."
"Why is that?"
"Because at the time, she was sleeping with your husband,"
he said, watching her reaction. "She was what?" she asked, shocked.
"You didn't know?"
"That son of a bitch," she said.
"Can I ask why you got divorced?"
"Because he was an abusive asshole, but only to me. Do you think he hurt Maggie?"
"It is a possibility," he said.
"Shit, my daughter's with him this weekend."
"I know, I met her earlier. I don't think you have to worry about her safety. I'm still investigating the case. If I find out it was him, may I call you to make sure your daughter is not with him? I don't think she needs to see your father being arrested."
"Yes, please," she said, as he handed her his phone. She put her number in it. He left with a fresh sense of what might have happened. He thought maybe Maggie found out Davidson was married and threatened to go to the wife after their relationship because she wanted him to herself. As he drove back to his office, there was a call over the radio of a 187 at the Haverton area. He raced to the scene. The nice old lady across from Maggie's former home was brutally murdered. Davidson was in the back of a squad car, handcuffed and covered with blood. Shelley was screaming and crying on the sidewalk. Detective Johnson called her mother. She arrived a half hour later to get her daughter. He was going to get his chance to solve this case. They drove back to the station, placing Detective Davidson in interview room 1. Detective Johnson grabbed the case file from his desk. Heading toward the interview room, he was stopped by Captain Smith. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked.
"With all due respect, sir, this is my case. I am the one who cracked it open," he said.
"He is right," said D.A. Mills. "You make sure you show him the respect he deserves. He's been on the force a long time," said Captain Smith.
"Would you give the same respect to a murderer who wasn't on the force and your friend?"
asked Johnson. D.A. Mills smiled. Detective Johnson walked into the interview room, taking the chair directly across from Davidson.
"What happened today, Davidson?"
Davidson sat there staring at Johnson. This was his fault. The old lady could have died of old age had he not gone snooping around. This is your fault. The blood of that old lady's on your hands.
How is this my fault?
You didn't stick your nose where it didn't belong, then she would still be alive.
If you would have told me the truth the day Maggie disappeared, then none of this would have taken place.
Fuck you and fuck her, he spat.
What happened to Maggie?
That is none of your business, he said. I want my lawyer.
Fine, but this will be the only opportunity you get to tell me the truth and get a light sentence. You know what they do to cops in jail, especially all the men you put away for the same crimes you committed. You won't last more than a day. Let me help you,
Detective Johnson said. Davidson stared into the two-way mirror. He knew the captain and DA were back there listening to him, and knew Johnson was right. His jaw tensed. The veins on his temples pulsed.
I'll tell you what you need to know, he said. What happened to Maggie?
I killed her, he said.
Why?
She threatened to go to my wife about us. I loved her, but my wife was pregnant and I wasn't going to leave her.
Where is her body?
I dumped her 2 towns over into a lake off of Highway 326, he said. Johnson turned and gave a nod to the mirror. Crews were sent, hoping to find some trace of her. The local police station was called. They had found a body 7 years ago, but were never able to identify it. The medical examiner went to their morgue. Davidson was booked and sent to the local jail to await his arraignment. The Jane Doe they found was Maggie Hart. She died from blunt force trauma. It was determined it was from a softball bat. Several blows to her face and head. There was no way to identify her, as she had no fingerprints on record or any dental work done. The only identifying mark was a small tattoo on her ankle of a butterfly that had faded over time. Davidson was arraigned the next day, and the trial date was set for a month later. He was kept in solitary confinement until the day of his trial. As he was walking down the hall, a prisoner came up behind him and the guards and shoved a shiv in between his ribs. He never made it to trial.